Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 277. And yes, we are calling in remotely. Even though Adam is just like right over there, he's in another room. It's kind of like I was telling these guys, it's like texting your wife at dinner and she's sitting across you. But hey, it is kind of weird when we're just doing two of us and then Jack's remote and not in the same room. So this works great for podcasts when we're doing interviews and all that. But we've got plenty of room. So Adam's hanging out there. Also, before we dive into stuff, you guys know the drill. Um, you can harass us on the chat, hit us up in the Q&A. But if you did not get an invite from us because you should have, but spam filters are what they are, and you may have opted out from all the stuff that you get from us. Come and join us in this place on the 6th of November. If you need an RSVP, like we do need an RSVP though, so we can get a head count, but it's simple, no gifts and nothing big, but we want to show the place off from 3:30 to 5:30 on the 6th of November. It's a Thursday. Here at 500 South Turner Avenue, Charlotte 28208, and we are in Suite 100 of the beautiful Savona Mill. We'd love to have you. So that's what I've got. Also, today's the first day you could do early voting. I did, and it took me a whopping 3 minutes to go into the South Park Library and cast my vote. So do your civic duty, and if you don't, then don't gripe about the way things are. So, right on. So, Adam, I know that Jack has some more than useless trivia. He has some actually beneficial information on shutdown stuff, etc., because he's got moles in Washington, D.C. On both sides of the aisle. So it'd be kind of interesting to hear an update on that. But anything that you have, because I know we want to go into budgeting and what works, what doesn't work, and it's kind of like talking about flossing your teeth, I think. But we'll get into that. But what do you got?
Yeah, no, I mean it's actually related to budgeting, and I did a LinkedIn post that I expected some flames, and I got moderate flames. Because I'm quite the provocateur, Gary.
You are.
But it actually is related to budget, and specifically it's on how do you count on tariffs and what's going to happen with tariffs.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that my comment was generally, you kind of have the theory of the tariff and why we're doing the tariffs. And at the same time, we've got a lot of clients that are paying tariffs on crap they're buying from themselves. And
Wow.
that sucks.
Yeah.
That absolutely sucks. And you know, I didn't check the attendee list. I don't think it's not a guy that I'd heard of from a comment standpoint that commented back on one of my posts said, yeah, yes, sir. I know that it stinks, but in theory, maybe they could use this opportunity to onshore manufacturing of the usual blah, blah, blah stuff. Right.
Right.
I wanted to flame back. Well, that would require that we get our birth rate up to have the workers to actually do the manufacturing, but I didn't. Um, Independent of that, though, I guess the thing that it made me feel like, independent of the budgeting, this is just my tirade, Jack. Tell them to stop the recording now before they post it. So I live up at Lake Norman, and when the tolls were approved on 77, look, am I happy about paying the toll bill? No, I'm not. But the way that it was pitched to a lot of us is that, like, look, dude, this is the only way it's gonna. Fairness aside, this is the only way you're getting your damn lanes.
Uh-huh.
You know, um, and that Mer- Pat McCrory lost the election due to those tolls, because if you look at why he lost,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
because Lake Norman did not vote for him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
But if you look at, well, who was really bitching about the tolls? Because I looked at that. I mean, because I live up there and I was pretty involved in local politics at the time. The people that were the most vocal about the tolls and how this is all a bunch of BS were from freaking home, Gary. They didn't
Well,
drive in it,
I, I thought
you
you were
know?
going to say they got paid by George Soros to
No, yeah,
complain about it.
there was a space laser involved somewhere, who knows? But no, it was the biggest rabble rousers were people who worked from home. Like
Wow.
I know these guys, like they don't drive in the traffic, you know? And I feel like with the tariffs, it's kind of the same way. Like, I don't know about Jack, but I haven't found anybody who's actually having to pay the tariff and deal with the consequences of what am I going to do from a pricing standpoint and the uncertainty who's like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to America.
Right. Right.
Like actually, I take that back. We do have one client who I will not name that lucked into a business purchase simply because for whatever reason the business he purchased years ago was considered a protected industry for reasons I have no idea because it should not be a like this crap really should be bought. It's you know it's ridiculous that this is the protected industry. Um, he looked into it, because the tariffs were so bad. But he's like, yeah, I feel like I got one over, like I'm the beneficiary. But absent that, like every other aspect of his business, he's had to locate new sources and do,
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff for the other areas of his business. But outside of this one guy who feels embarrassed by it, I've found nobody who's actually in the middle of having to deal with the tariff. It's like, oh yeah, I'm so happy right now that I'm doing my part for for society. It's like, I don't know. It got me on the soapbox. Like, yeah, the only people who are singing this whole Gary, we should be making the sacrifice, for the good of America, aren't actually sacrificing.
Yeah.
Other than maybe indirectly somewhere down the road, they're paying slightly more for a consumer good. That's it. So, all right, I've shut up now. Soapbox
Well,
done. Jack, save it from here.
before Jack goes in, like we were impacted just in this building because I think we had close to 100 grand in tariffs that hit the construction of this building, which was tough. But thank you On Block and thank you Redline, and thank you Playbook for still helping us get in under budget by 100 grand on top of that, and 2 months early. So thank you to those guys. Shout out to them. Jack, well, wait a minute. You're back in Washington, D.C.
I
Jack,
am.
talk
There's
to
not
us.
much going on here, so I'm just hanging out on the steps. I was at the White House a few moments ago and then teleported to the Capitol building. Thought it was more appropriate. Just wanted to see what was going on. I was checking on the construction. So yes, Joseph, they asked for my opinion on tearing down the East Wing, but it's a little bit too late to implement my thoughts on that. So back to the Capitol building. But yeah, as you can see.
Wait. Shoemaker, erase that too, because Jack would probably get in trouble for that one too.
Oops,
Yeah,
darn it.
it's like we totally turned you.
Oh. And just when we maybe have gotten off the radar, now we're back on it. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few interesting facts. So first of all, I didn't realize that this is well, okay. So the U.S. Senate failed to, for the 11th time earlier this week, advance the U.S. House passed measure. So they've been voting and voting and voting, and nothing happens. Um, the House is basically at a standstill. They haven't voted. It's been maybe about a month or so now that they haven't really touched it. So it's really in the Senate's hands, and that's what you're hearing the discussions back and forth. What I didn't know, it is the longest full government shutdown ever. I didn't realize that, but it's because, and I don't know what determines whether it's full or partial, but the 2018-19 partial shutdown lasted 35 days. 95-96 spending impasse, also partial, lasted 21 days. So we're getting higher into the making history, folks. So, and then I also found some interesting information on the delay of data and what that means with respect to businesses and benchmarking. Um, the Bureau of Labor Statistics will continue to struggle to collect data from smaller businesses that don't submit employment information electronically. So it essentially skews the information that they are able to provide and output. And so it's not as comprehensive. So it's slanted to those businesses that are reporting electronically now, only electronically. So, and it's process automated, et cetera. So the good news is that more and more businesses now report electronically rather than, having to actually submit their information, or they're part of a program for submitting that data. But the impact is smaller businesses often rely on manual reporting, making them more vulnerable to data collection disruptions. And then ensuring timely, accurate data is crucial for effective economic analysis and decision making. So those are some things that are going on, and just a narrow snippet of how that impacts all of us as business owners, in one aspect that we really haven't been talking about with respect to data that's provided to us, because we are in this session going to talk about looking at things prospectively and down the road, and dealing with budgets, and then taking another look at them later on into the year and not just letting them go. So just kind of some timely information into that. And that's all I got.
What? That's
I
all you
know.
got?
That's all I got for
Come
now.
on, Jack.
More will come up.
Um, and here's what's interesting. I just noticed that our internet was unstable, which is crazy. I'm actually meeting with one of the top dudes at Spectrum today because we upgraded to 1 gig in this space, and we're upgrading now to 2 gigs up and down, which will be great. But that was a whole fiasco. I don't know which was worse, dealing with, with Spectrum or dealing with the government. Just trying to get internet service in here, but thank God we got the right 2 people who could actually make a decision and helped us get this thing pushed through, because we were going to be delayed in being able to move in if that didn't happen. So anyway, I'm grateful for those guys, and we are going to have lunch with them. But before we go into budgeting, I just want to read this. Oh yeah, Adam got disconnected. It said our internet was unstable. I don't know why. We're going to 2G though, Adam, next Friday. But this was interesting, and it was based on our announcement post for this thing, and then I am going to get to Joseph. But Mark Learning PhD, he's in a LinkedIn group with me, and he says a strong budget should serve as both a compass and a shock absorber. Oh, I never really heard of it as a shock absorber, but he said if it's too rigid, it stops being useful the moment conditions shift. Oh man, that was brilliant. I love that. So yeah, Joseph has weighed in on a couple things. He said we should have called him about the internet, and that's true. And we are going to have Al Gore on here because he invented the internet, but we're waiting on his schedule and his people. But Joseph says, hey, we were talking about the tolls on Monday with some business leaders, and it was then the Speaker of the House, now Senator Tillis, who pushed the toll roads through. The original bill did not contain the private public roads, but added, and obviously was a huge error, as it was added with the promise of shoulders, that the shoulders would turn into another lane of traffic, which never happened. Oh, and interesting. So Joseph did weigh in. The AWS outage evidently has everybody's internet unstable. Okay, well, that's good to know. Yeah, I saw that it was their oldest data center or whatever that was the culprit. So we'll see. So back to budgeting. Jump ball for both Jack and Adam. But since we all deal with business owners, we're all business owners as well. I'm just curious as to give us some examples of what we see are common threads across a lot of business owners, because we are right now in the thick of budget season right now. Everybody's
Yep.
working real hard on these things. Talk about commonalities and things that have worked where you've seen, man, these guys really do it well, and the other ones where they don't work so well.
Sure, I'll give you. Oh, you want to be the jump ball, Jack? Go for it. Go for it, buddy.
I'll go because in reality, there's no way I would ever beat you in an actual jump ball at our respective heights. That's okay.
Gotta go
I,
for
don't
it
know.
virtually.
I do suck at basketball, so don't.
All three of us do
Yeah,
then.
don't sell yourself short. That was
That's
funny on
okay.
so many levels.
No, that's okay. It's a matter of physics and just,
Yeah,
so it's all right.
yeah,
I would say one thing that I see, and it being the end of October, bad thing to do is just take your budget from this year and say, looks good. Let me add 10% to that without any due diligence into it. And specifically, or a better route to do that is yes, look at the historical performance of your business, not just this year, not just in prior years, but go back maybe 3 years. And again, this is Jack theory, but go back and look at the history and look at the revenue, look at the expenses, and look at how you were able to predict what those were going to be. And then a key thing that people miss is that they don't go back and say, we had an increase in cost. Wonder why that was. Was that a one-time issue, or was that a recurring issue? Or was that a one-time issue that will become a recurring issue? And they don't interpolate for that. Sometimes they do that on the expense side. But then, there's the other side of the table, which is we need to look at the revenue side. Was that a one-time boon to business that you got this contract and it is maybe not as lucrative? Maybe it becomes more of an annuity as far as revenue and income is concerned because you did whatever it is you did in mass in 2023. So that revenue in 24, 25, and 26 may not be as much and maybe marginal revenue that is brought in from that particular client. And then also get down to the details of the revenue generators, the people, the individuals, and find out what's going on with them professionally and personally. And I will tell you that, one of the recent things that our CEO has done for the firm, she's also a very well respected and very good employment law attorney. So she was the chair of our management committee, and she is now actually the CEO. So she is putting her lawyering aside for a little bit and actually running the company as a true CEO, which was also, I think, an awesome transition for our firm. Um, but she has implemented not just end of year discussions with equity partners, but mid-year, quarterly, and upon request. And so she wants to know what's going on so that she and the management committee and our finance committee can put together an appropriate budget moving forward. Because I will tell you that in the past, shamefully, but it was just because it was, the easy thing to do and actually was consistently accurate for the most part was to basically take last year and then just kind of do a topical increase or decrease without going two, three, four layers deep into the whys of Why was there an increase in costs, a decrease in costs? So you're looking at both increases and decreases, the positive and the negative, and figuring out if this is something that is going to continue in order to put together your 2026 budget. And I think that all of that, and that was a lot, and a lot of different concepts that we can unpack, but I think that that is the biggest hurdle or not moving forward properly that gets you in a bind after the first quarter, second quarter, where you've completely missed it. And you're like, well, I did the best that we could. Well, no, you really
Right.
didn't. So,
Yeah. Um, every time you every time there's a story like that, because that's pretty common in a lot of companies, especially true in, accounting firms, law firms, medical practices, stuff like that. I always think, I want to be a real company. Like, we're gonna run this place like a real company. So you know, and
and
then
that's the voice that we will all forever hear in our heads when we have that thought.
yeah, exactly. You can't unhear it.
No.
um, no, the awesome for you guys doing that. If she needs some advice on how to then wrangle the knuckleheads after you elevated the CEO who still want to be, hey, we're totally gonna do this. Oh, you want me to comply with that? No, maybe you didn't get the memo. I'm an equity partner around here.
Yeah.
And she's happy to give me a call. So the no to the question, Gary, about best practices versus not I'll kind of go into the not, but then I'll also see what share an experience of what's pretty cool. So actually I'll do the experience on what's cool before, because I got to witness this firsthand, and then I'll go into what not to do. um you know you see it some you know anytime somebody goes through a liquidity event. So hey, I'm selling the company, I'm taking outside capital, I'm selling a private equity, whatever the case may be, going through an ESOP transaction, however you go to do it. One of the things you're always going to get asked for is, show me the budget. you know and what's always the people that have amazing credibility are the people that are able to land the plane on that budget. Meaning, like, here's the budget, here's the result, and there's not too much of a deviation between the budget and the result. And what that really is a demonstration of is that as a management team, we got our crap together. We're reliable. Like, if I'm able to produce a document at the beginning of the year that predicts what my EBIT is going to be, and then I deliver pretty close to that result, regardless of sort of what happened with the sales. If I deliver pretty close to that result, it shows that I have my crap together. It shows exactly like your quote said, that, hey, if the sales aren't showing up, something happened from a cost structure standpoint. I was able to shuck and jive enough that I was able to land the plane on the EBITDA front. Because where that comes into play, especially in the sense of a transaction, is that when I'm arguing up how amazing I am from a valuation standpoint, based on, hey, what's going to happen next year, I have credibility. I have credibility because I'm now saying I predict something. The thing that I predicted, I have a track record of actually making happen. You can count on my word. Like, is that ultimately going to get you, three more turns on your money in the form of, like, going from a 5 multiple to an 8 or an 8 to 11? No, but will it get you a half turn? Hell yeah, it will. Maybe even one turn, just based on the fact that you're a credible narrator in your story. Where I saw that happen firsthand most recently actually wasn't with it wasn't on a transaction, but it was with a client who was asking for a credit increase with his bank based on future sales. And I don't know if you got the memo lately, but it's still kind of a little tough out there from a banking perspective. just based on interest rates, uncertainty, all the kind of stuff that's happening. But the he got it. Why did he get it? Because he had a track record of, showing the bank his projections and then nailing his projections for years, like, 6 years running. This guy's produced a forecast, nailed the projection within a few percentage points. So he's a like, if you think about the 4 C's of credit, dodge, duck, dive, duck, and dodge. I just watched Dodgeball, by the way, over the weekend. Character, credibility. Like, I can't even remember what the 4 C's are, but it's something, that sounds really good. Kind of credibility is one of those, credibility and character is one of those, so being good at this, like, as much of a painful exercise as it may seem like, being good at it actually does have a tangible result with an external third party. So all of that said, what not to do. And I'll start off with the revenue side of the equation. And I loved what Jack said about, just use last year and increase it, as we talked about in the last webinar, that Jack went back and listened to. Just kidding. He's now ChatGPT. Give me the transcript. He's going to ask me a question. I'm just kidding with that. That most businesses are tied to what happens in the broader economy, like at some level. Next year, the broader economy is forecast to grow, but it's forecast to grow at a slower rate than it just grew. Therefore, if I'm just saying same as last year, plus, blah, 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 that won't be true. Unless I change something. So, like, reading what's going on generally is important, because even though it's forecast to grow, it's not at the same rate relative to 25 versus 24. So just kind of understanding what's the broader macroeconomic environment. No, I'm just going to ignore that. Slap a number on a sheet of paper. That's kind of one thing. Another thing that is a totally fatal flaw that a lot of people don't do, but it sounds like Jack, Shoemaker's doing it, and starting the process. So bravo to you guys. They never do a bottoms up validation of the top line projection. So they go, yeah, we feel pretty good. I read your tea leaves, sir. I understand the broader economy. I'm putting this new program in place. I still believe we're going to grow by 15%. Well, from what accounts? Like, what do you see happening in your existing customers? What do you see in terms of, like, well, how many new customers is that? And have we ever done that before? If we're introducing a new product, what's the penetration rate going to be? In other words, like, there's no bottoms up plan that's followed up that provides a source of validation to the top line projection that people have. I mean, this would be, I'm going to use Walmart as my next example. It'd be the equivalent of Walmart saying, yeah, we're totally going to grow by 15%, and then choosing to never look at same store sales growth, relative to new store openings, or like whatever that'd be. Walmart would say that's ridiculous. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number 2 and 3 are actually the opposite of each other. Mistake number 2, this is a little bit about budget, but also, kind of a lot about complacency and accepting mediocrity. If people have listened to this before, they also know that we're big fans of, hey, your measurement point of measuring how well you're doing isn't necessarily sales, it's bottom line profit. And what you really need to be focused on is what's the ratio of gross profit, because everything gross profit and below is in your control. You can manipulate gross profit itself, which is sales minus cost of goods sold, some, by good buying, more efficiency, less scrap and stuff like that. But once you've gotten that, everything else is the overhead, selling general administrative expense, right? So that's where a lot of what, you always need to be improving gross profit, but once you get at it, you need to keep the rest of the costs in control. So I'll pause for 5 seconds. I didn't see who's on the invite list, but anybody want to take a guess without Googling it right now, what the operating profit relative to gross profit? So we all know that Walmart's a low cost leader. We all know that, hey, if you supply Walmart, basically it's called, hey, come on in
Bend over.
for your beat down. Yeah,
Exactly.
we're gonna fly into Bentonville to then give you a beat down and say you're lucky to do business with us. Thank you very much. So I'm not talking about cost of goods sold. We all know how they get that. I'm talking about once they beat the supplier down, gross profit. Like that's what they've got to live off of, is that gross profit. Like that's gross profit is what's ultimately generating the cash flow that they use to pay the dividend out to the shareholders. Does anybody want to guess? Thank you, Joe. What the operating profit relative to the gross profit is of Walmart? Joe guessed 10%. 5, 4, 3,
Three,
2,
two,
1. Just
45%.
45. Yeah, I mean, Joseph, hey, split the difference. The actual answer is 20%.
Wow.
Which, when you think about it, is actually unbelievably impressive considering the executive pay packages, bonuses, all that kind of stuff that goes into that. They don't have a teleworkforce. Those guys are working in the office, you know. So they've got all of that, and it's 20%. And that's been pretty consistent for years, you know. So you have to ask yourself as a business owner, if Walmart can do 20%, what am I doing? Exactly, Joe. If Walmart can do 20%, you know, I'm doing the whole, you don't understand, I mean, our margins, blah, blah, our margins, we get bit. If Walmart can do 20%, why can't I? So you're not asking yourself that question, right? So that's mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is actually doing the opposite of that, which is, my favorite projection is the one that shows sales going up, gross profit going up, and overhead going flat or down. Guess what, Jack? Our EBIT is going to be 40%. No business of any size in steady state has an EBITDA of 40%. It's ridiculous. You can't name it now. In other words, like in my history, I haven't seen it. And when I talk about steady state, been in business for 10 years or more, has more than 50 employees, it's just not possible. It's because you need the minions to do the stuff. There's just like other stuff that you weren't counting on in your projections. So my point in saying that is the opposite of that is assuming that you're going to be able to hold the line on the selling general administrative expense, which are typically fixed cost or fixed variable costs, meaning like they don't go like that, they go like that, then all of a sudden they go like that, then they go like that. So that's the opposite end of the other mistake that I make, which is either you're not pushing hard enough on the overhead, or alternatively, you underestimated how much of it you were going to add relative to your growth projection. And with that in mind, I'll drop the mic and shut up.
So, I want to weigh in. Love all of those examples. At Bank of America, when I was there, you were going to be in the naughty chair if you missed your budget by over 10% or under 10%. So you got penalized just as badly for being under your budget by more than 10%, because that money and those resources could have been deployed someplace else. So the fear of God was in us early on. Like, and when you're managing, my height watermark, it was just under 40 million that I was managing, and that's terrifying, especially when it's going across a lot of stuff and a lot of people. But what we found was, one, the budgets were bottom up driven, and then top down had their say. Like, we didn't just have free reign. But a great best practice is, are you going to the front line, and are you going to them about what needs to be, and also putting the fear of God in them that this is not just a Christmas wish list. You're going to be held accountable for managing to that. That's one. Number two was on just the frequency of monitoring, because things change. I mean, look at where we were 6 years ago from now. 6 years ago from now, we were beginning budgets for 2020. We were hearing maybe a little bit about this thing out of Wuhan or whatever. Not yet, but in another month or so, we were starting to hear a little bit about it. But now surely it's not going to hit us. And then all of a sudden, boom, we better have some shock absorbers on the car because we got hit with a jolt. And I remember thinking, what in the world are we going to do? But we were managing cash. Like, we had all of our levers for sales at that time were gone. Nobody wants to meet. Nobody is, like, everybody's just trying to think about how in the world they survive. So we were managing cash. We were dealing with what was in our control, which seemed like very little, but what was in our control, we were managing, and we ended up making it through. That and I'm going to use one more quick example, but I want to go back to both of you guys as a jump ball. If you aren't accurate on current data, you're hamstringing yourself. And I'll give you an example. A big client of mine that was a coaching client, when they brought me in, they said, "Hey, do you work and will you coach our VP of finance?" And I said, "No." Why? What's going on? Because I'll work with the team, but not necessarily there. And they said, "Well, it's taken us 3.5 months to close the books." I said, "Well, that is not a coaching issue. That's somebody has Peter principled and they're incompetent in that role now. You're careening down the toll lanes going up to Davidson to see Adam at 90 miles an hour, but you've spray painted the windshield black. You can't see through it. And unless you're in a Tesla, you have no idea what's going on, and it's dangerous." And so sure enough, they did make a switch. They found another role for that person. They were humane, and they found the right role for that person, but it wasn't driving all the finances for this company that was continuing to get big. And they were able to get to a 5-day close, so they had accurate data, and they can look and they can make changes because changes happen. Adam or Jack, have you guys seen kind of the set it and forget it examples where people are just like hoping for the best and then it gets too late? And if so, give us an example without names.
You want to go first this time, or you want me to continue?
Yeah, hit it.
All
Keep
right,
trucking, buddy.
man, doing well on these jump balls. All right. So, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's just the whole set it and forget it and not going back. And we've talked about this before as well on the program, that if you don't go back and look at it over the course of time, and it could be set at whatever pace you wish. It could be just a mid-year. Anything more than at the end of the year, beginning of the following year is better. And so, but there's also, I also want to say that there's not to be intrusive into your customers, but knowing kind of what's going on with them. A great example is the whole tariffs. If you are, and I will suggest to you that if you are
Yeah.
not asking your customers how they and their own customers are dealing with tariffs, then you're not asking the right questions. And depending on the, so as we're talking about putting together budgets, you have to rely upon what, if you go and ask your customers, what do you think is, what do you think you're going to be asking us for in the following year kind of thing. Um, and then asking, how has this impacted your business? And how do you think it's going to impact your business? What you're really asking is, how is your customer base doing? I mean, are you going to be able to push out as much product and services as you think because of these external factors and specifically tariffs if it impacts you? And so you get, and you may inadvertently be coaching them to ask the right questions. So then it's better for your own customers because they're asking the right questions and then providing accurate data for you to input in your budget process as well. So now, having said all that, I know that all of us, if you don't go and do this, you're otherwise going to be sitting on the couch watching football, kind of thing. So we all don't have enough time to do all these things. So you have to pick and choose what's important to you. And I would suggest to you that, if you can't go that far deep into that process of asking those questions, then at least go to the just prior level, which is ask your customers, your clients, those questions when you're putting together your budgets now, and then ask the same questions mid-year into the quarter, or even, since again, yeah, I said that very flippantly, obviously, that we all don't have enough time to do all this, is that maybe pick some. Maybe take your top um, 20 clients and divide that by four. So you're reaching out to five of them
Yeah.
every quarter and seeing
Yeah.
how things are going. So there's various ways to do that, but doing nothing is the worst thing that you can do.
Yeah, I think I would echo Jack's comments that, if you don't have a process for reevaluating at preset intervals, you just don't have the time to react, So am I if I whip in the first quarter, I at least want to make a conscious choice as to continuing with the plan as is versus hey, that's okay. Well, in other words, like, to me, whipping in the first quarter, I will make it up on the back end. Don't worry, boss man, is probably not an answer that I'm okay with accepting. You know, we whipped in the first quarter with extremely logical rationale, like, hey, it's because the customer asked me to delay it until, this, second quarter. Therefore, you should see the result in second quarter, not first, and we'll actually beat the second quarter because of it. Those are rational explanations that I can buy into, in terms of like why am I be willing to let it ride without making a change? But if I can't get to a rational explanation, and by rational, that isn't like the BS, in other words, we'll make it up on the backside is kind of fantasy land.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so, you gotta, in other words, well, let me put it this way. If you've got a track record of making up on the backside, I suppose I can live with that, you know. But if I don't have a track record of ever having make it up on the backside, I I'm not a credible narrator now, so I need to just be honest with myself and make some changes.
And I have a caveat to that as well, which is if you think you're going to make it up on the back end or down the road, you need to be mindful of that because, that's also you're rolling the dice that actually is going to come to fruition. So let's say that traditionally in this year and prior years, the cadence of work from a particular customer or client has been that maybe it is a lot of third quarter which may be their first fiscal quarter, right? If they're on a 6/30 fiscal year. So you got to be mindful of those things. And again, you wouldn't know that unless you ask those questions. You just assume that, okay, well, business picks up in the second half of the year for them. So we're going to budget that revenue and allocate those potential costs for Q3 and Q4. And so you need to be mindful of that as well.
I'm laughing because Papa Joe, you are the funniest. You are probably one of the longest standing and attendees of this, and I always enjoy your stuff. And so, for anybody that hasn't seen it in the chat, Papa Joe weighs in and says that's the operating principle of the Carolina Panthers, whiff in the first quarter.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, like the business equivalent of that is, no, we're totally going to spot the team 2 touchdowns because that'll motivate us to get our shit together. Yeah, that's always my favorite. Like I don't know about you guys, but a great game for me is not a close game. A great game for me is called 4 touchdown lead with 4 minutes to go. Like in other words, like while it still could be screwed up, the likelihood is like down to like 1 in 1,000.
That's why people don't like soccer. They don't appreciate the art of it, the whole
Yeah.
90 to 100 minutes. And as my wife and others would say, let me guess, 0-0. Like, yeah, but
You don't understand.
You didn't see how many times this guy was near mortal death, and he
There were
came back.
so many great saves. So many great saves.
and the referees still suck. I'm not supposed to say that as a former referee, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man. Do either of you have an example of where somebody just has kind of done it on a wing and a prayer for one too many times, and then it just bit them in the butt? And because hey, just it happens, because a lot of people go into business.
Yeah. I think the best, there's always the overly optimistic guy that, or gal that just started the business. And the advice that I always give people is whatever you put, you guys know that I don't drink anymore, but when I used to drink, going to the doctor for years, how many beers a night do you drink? 2. How many nights a week? Maybe 3. That total lie. And then I would start the conversation by saying, hey, by the way, I'm not one of those liars. So I know it's going to sound like a lot, and then I would proceed to lie again. So what we always tell new people starting out is that, whatever you think you're going to do, it's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much. And when they say, no, I factored that in, no, they didn't. Because otherwise their spouse would have said, no, you're keeping your job. So like that's always the advice for the guys just going into the business. At the same time, what I also tell the same people is that the number of clients that BGW have had in our almost 20-year history that actually had discipline and the ability to stick with it that have gone out of business, 0. Like I could say that definitively. Like the people that stuck with it had discipline, had routine, kept the faith, 0. That they were, because they put in the work. So I think the wing and a prayer, though, where I think, man, God, I really wish they would have followed my advice. It was really the 07-08 recession, people. I think a lot of people learned some lessons from that, but at the same time, it's been so long ago that it's hard to remember some of them, because that's when we were first starting out, right? So you had people that were on a big run up, prior to because it was, I don't know if you guys remember, but the economy was actually quite good.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, before the it was like overnight. By the way, there's about to be a banking system collapse tomorrow. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
it's like
We were rocking and
yeah,
rolling in '08, early '08.
happened quite suddenly. Um, so the so what a lot of people did, thinking that it would be something other than temporary or something temporary, is they held on to cash reserves. You know, hey, I'm going to keep. You know, I want to keep the people noble efforts. Like I want to keep people employed, keep my team intact. You know, and it just and then another month, and then another month,
Yeah.
and then another month, and then another month, and then and all of a sudden it's a year. You know, and then the next thing you know, I
Yeah.
went from you know a 6 month cash reserve down to I don't even have a payroll in the bank. You know,
Yeah.
and the way that they also when they finally like, oh geez, I need to do something. You know, it was like I know I need to get rid of 10, but I'm only going to get rid of one. Well, that didn't work. Now, you know,
Yeah.
it's just you're way better off. Like as much as it sucks, you're way better off just getting it over with. You know, like in
Yeah.
other words, because the people that are left, you're like, in other words, if you do them one at a time, everybody's still going to be saying, "Oh my God, am I the next person?" You know, so you might as well just get it over with. I mean, it's sort of like at the federal government level, you know, right? If I got to do Doge, I would have done Doge differently than Doge was done. However, one of the things that I would have done if I would have dozed is I wouldn't do this BS that we're doing now, which is, hey, let's keep on riffing people. You know, I would have said, we're cutting 10%, period. You know, across the board, submit your list of names by Friday, you know, and
Yeah.
then after that, I don't care. We're not doing it again, you know, and that's who's left. So that's 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 what I saw people do that I would not have done. Is they just, you know, they didn't do it, but when they finally did do it, they did it very slowly, and that just was a permanent. Like again, it was a nice thing to do. I like it felt very human, but at the same time, it was a really massive at a massive cost.
You know, at that time, I remember, and Philip Lanier talked about it on our podcast. But he's a good friend and a client, and he had been building his company up, hit that, and then all of a sudden, you know, it hit everybody, and he was in the erosion control business, and nobody was building, nobody was lending. He cut it down to just him and his wife, sold the dream house, went into a small house, but he cut fast and he did it right. And then he built it back up to where it was 4 times, 5 times bigger than that. And it didn't take him forever to do it, but he moved quickly. And he also wasn't maintaining his own lifestyle. They took it serious, you know, and sometimes you don't know, you know, how fast is too fast, but it ended up serving him well. And I think sometimes, you know, I think at the end of the day, whether it be on, hey, I don't know even how to budget very well. A lot of people, I've heard it more than once. Somebody like, I really don't know what I'm doing on that. Well, that's okay. You didn't go into business and with your idea of a service or a product because you were going to be the biggest, you know, financial whiz next to Warren Buffett. You hire somebody else, you know, find somebody outside the jar to help you read the label, you know. It's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. So there are plenty of people that you can do it on a like a fractional basis. Um, so anyway, Adam's got to go. He's got a call, so you get a hall pass early. Thank you for joining us, Adam. Jack, is there anything else that you want to cover?
Yeah, so kind of expanding upon that, it's an interesting subset of business owners in the franchise community. So you have prospect franchisees. And if you know anything about franchising or have looked into it or you are one, you know that there is this 500-page document that is presented to you as a prospect franchisee that is a prospectus, but they call it the franchise disclosure document. It is similar to, in concept, a prospectus that you get when you are buying into stocks that tells you the good, the bad, the ugly before you invest in publicly traded stock. And so um, in the documentation is a little bit of a roadmap. And so franchisors are required to provide to prospect franchisees a range of costs and share with them what the franchisor believes it's going to cost a franchisee in the first 3 months of operating, to open and then to actually operate for the first 3 months. So, and then franchisors are not required to, but some of them do put what's called an item 19. Um, and it's financial information, typically historical, that shows whatever is they're reporting on. It could be all of the franchise units, it could be company owned units, it could be a mixture of both. And so, um, even with all of that information, I tell prospect franchisees that you must put together your own pro formas, your own budget. And while you have some guidance and guardrails, I wouldn't even call them guardrails. I would just call it guidance because there is the all-in garbage miscellaneous last category in that range of costs, which is other costs. And so I go straight to that when I see that chart, and and it gives me an indication of how well the franchisor is being realistic with its prospects. And so, to your comments and to Adam's comments about not knowing how to move forward, and it really is kind of psychological paralysis in saying, okay, well, I really don't want to go through the process, but what you're really
Yeah,
saying is, I don't know how to go through the process. But
right.
you have to go through the process. And I think that once you take that leap of faith and rip off that band-aid of, okay, well, I know I'm gonna bleed here and I need to put the band-aid on it, which is put something together, but go all in, then you have, maybe the discipline of doing it on a recurring basis. And so, again, the worst thing to do is to do nothing, and to do nothing is a choice that you are
Yep.
making assertively to do nothing. So,
So one thing that I'll just add, just as far as a practical tidbit, if your CPA or your accounting group, and this isn't a plug for us, uh, ask them if they can provide any guidance. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll be, oh, well, I don't want to, provide that kind of guidance or whatever. Then ask them if they say no, that's outside of our comfort zone, is outside of our scope or whatever, for whatever reason. Ask them, do you know anybody that's like a fractional controller or a fractional CFO who I could hire for their advice? That's a much more affordable option for you, and it'll pay dividends with the right ones. Now, there are some, just like in any other trade, there are good ones and there are bad ones. But if anybody needs anybody and a reference, give us a shout. We don't get paid, we don't get spiffed on the back end by any of these guys, but we want to help you. We want to help you grow. That's why we keep doing this. So anyway, it has been fun to have all of you guys on here for 277 weeks. Next week, the 278th week, on the 30th, one of the things I'm thinking about, Jack, is because we're still kind of in forecasting mode and all that kind of stuff, maybe get into some real practical stuff that I've seen work, and that you have seen work, and that Adam's seen work, and that y'all have seen work on driving revenue. There are a lot of, you will not cut your way to greatness. You got to drive revenue. And what we found here is measuring inputs and driving inputs versus just the focus on, hey, what's in your pipeline? What's in your pipeline? What'd you close today? What'd you close today? Those are lagging indicators. A lot of people don't measure the leading indicators. So maybe want to talk about that. Papa Joe said, hey, what about company valuations? I think we could get into that too, because both of those things kind of dovetail. You know, people are looking on company valuations on your EBITDA performance, but they're also looking for trends on growth. You know, are you going downwards? If so, that's not going to be good for your multiple. So I think that's a great idea, Joe.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I would say when Adam had said, okay, you know, revenue increases, but you assume that costs are going to be and your EBITDA goes up. Yeah, I mean, you have to spend money to make money, but you got to spend it wisely. And I think a lot of us don't think about that as often. It's like, well, it worked in the past, but is it going to work in the future? So we can incorporate all of that into our discussion next week.
yeah, I like that. That'll be fun. All right, guys. Well, we're going to put this up on the BGW YouTube channel later on today. Shoemaker has their own. It'll be up there too. Thank you guys for joining us. And Joe, you got to get a gift card or something because you've made me laugh too hard on the whiffing in the first quarter with the Panthers. All right, you guys have a great day. Enjoy
Thank
this
you.
beautiful weather.
See you
Don't
next
light any
time.
fires out there either. It's too dry. See
Thanks.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye.